Without further ado, I want to get started with Senator Alexis Calatayud, who represents an area in South Miami-Dade County, a fearless leader in education and someone who cares most about outcomes for every single child in our state. And Madam Senator, I'll turn it to you and just ask you briefly to introduce yourself first so folks know who they're dealing with as one of our great champions.
Thanks, Madeline. Hi, everybody. My name's Alexis Calatayud. I represent 550,000 incredible people in Southeast Miami-Dade County in the Florida Senate. I've served as their representative for the past 3 years. Born and raised in Miami, I'm the granddaughter of Cuban exiles and freedom fighters. I went to FIU and it transformed my life. I dedicated the last 12 years to education advocacy, starting as a student advocate, going up to Tallahassee and to Washington, to help make sense for legislators to understand why investment in education was so important and why specifically programs that help destroy barriers to economic mobility and that engage with the challenges of generational poverty matter a lot. The last several years, due to my exposure to early learning through one of my mentors, former Representative Vance Lupus, have taken a deep interest in making sure that creating equity of opportunity begins at birth, not just in scholarships for higher education, making sure that every young person has the opportunity to express their highest potential, is the most American thing we can aim for, in my opinion. So that's kind of my story. That's why I'm dedicated to the early childhood space and really to wherever we can create educational opportunity.
Beautiful. I know there's a whole range of issues that you care about and that your constituents are calling you about every day. We invited you here because one of the bills we were following most closely this session was your Senate Bill 1382, a bit of a mouthful, but called Access to School Readiness Program for Economically Disadvantaged Households. Now, I think this audience knows well, school readiness is our state's tuition assistance program for early learning. What was it that this bill sought to do? Why was it so important to you? And what happened?
Sure. So as we look at the early learning space, we see that it hasn't received the incremental increased funding over the years or expansion to the folks that can be served in the school readiness space like you would see within the universal voucher system in the K through 12, or you see in the exponentially incredible investment in the state college and state university system. What we endeavored to do in this legislation was to keep pace and to slightly exceed the minimum wage increase that the constitutional amendment passed by the citizens of Florida required. So we transitioned our school readiness program income eligibility from federal poverty level to state median income, which was really important to help deal with the reality that Florida is outpacing the nation in wage growth. The second piece to that was increasing the threshold of income eligibility for our families, so that one, we would completely capture the increase of final minimum wage. Today is the effective date, actually, of that change, serendipitously enough. And really to make a wedge within conversation in the House and the Senate on the importance of workforce early learning programs, which really was the heart of the school readiness program, to make sure that in kind of the twofold concept that, we hear with Brittany Birkin, two generational prosperity initiatives. SR is kind of the best program we have to make sure that parents can go to work and children can have access to life-changing early childhood education. So what we did this session was change the FPL to SMI and also increase the eligibility threshold tacked to October 1 aligned to the increase in minimum wage to ensure that no family would become ineligible because of the state minimum wage increase, but also to have a slight increase over the minimum wage itself, which we need to eventually go farther than that.
Yeah.
Because if we're only supporting our minimum wage or slightly higher than that workforce, it's not a true workforce program. It's not the essence of the purpose of the program and the impact, the economic impact to our local businesses that this program truly could have. But so that's what
Yeah.
we've accomplished this session. And there is still so much more to do.
Yes. Well, you're talking about Florida outpacing the nation in terms of wage growth. And of course, the whole reason you tackled this is because we're also outpacing the nation in terms of cost of living growth. So that change doesn't necessarily mean a family no longer needs that tuition assistance to be able to send their children to an early learning opportunity. And of course, in addition to meeting the income requirements for the program, you've got to be working or going to school, which is your whole point on that two-generation impact for families. And so that is wonderful. There's one more provision of the bill I'd love you to talk about in terms of the wait list and what kind of data we'll have going forward to think about what the needs are for this program.
Sure. So one of the challenges we have within the legislature and without, when we're talking about the school readiness program, is understanding what the school readiness waitlist actually means. So in up to this point, that has been staggered with people who have not yet checked their income eligibility but are on the wait list. People who are approved by income eligibility, but there's not a slot for them. There's a whole spectrum of individuals that could be on a wait list that don't truly help us understand the need of Florida, nor help us project out and understand the investment the state needs to make to meet current workforce need of this workforce early learning program. So
Yeah.
what we hope to do through this past legislation that was passed was to make sure that we adequately understand at a system level across the state of Florida the true need, and that we can capture what those families are at multiple income levels. So as we go into the future of policy making, we can have informed conversations within the legislature that allow us to have real dollar conversations. If we make an investment at this level, these are the amount of families we truly would be able to serve versus the number of families that we don't have enough information to actually have them on the consideration of a wait list for projected spending and projected investment. So that's an important piece of what we were able to work on this session. And refining, the goal is to refine the data available to legislators, available to appropriators and decision makers, to agency, so that we can make choices that are hopefully bold and
Yeah.
are meeting the workforce economic need for this program.
Yeah. I mean, and you framed this around the investments our state has made in the K-12 system and in the higher ed system. And my gosh, how has Bright Futures transformed our state colleges and universities? And when you think about the fact that every parent that chooses can draw down state funds to support the education for their third grader, but not so for their 3-year-old, what you're talking about is a conversation about how much investment we do need for those earlier years and getting the right information to evaluate that. And it makes me think about the report the Florida Chamber Foundation put out last year that showed for every dollar invested in school readiness, I'm going from memory here, but I think it was $5 of return to the state. And so understanding that along with understanding the need, I love the picture you've painted about really having the right information to make the best decisions for our taxpayer funds.
Sure. And
So,
to even say in dollars, right? So if you had no scholarship for the University of Florida, you pay $7,000 a year. We
yeah,
know that all of our parents paying market rate are paying more for their 3-year-old than they would their 18-year-old.
Oh, yeah, often more than double. Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, there are so many more questions to get into, including the technicalities of how this bill came into be. Because you look at SB 1382, it says it didn't pass. You know, it got sort of added on to another bill at the last minute. So if we have time, we'll talk more about that. But let me bring up Representative Robin Bartleman, a champion from Broward County and educator by trade, who has always focused on those who have special needs in our education system. And so, Representative, I'll ask you, as I did the senator, to just briefly introduce yourself first, and then we'll talk about your great school readiness bill that passed.
Okay, just to mention, as the senator was part of my bill, so I want to give
Yes.
that credit. She does a great job. I think she'll have her fingerprint on a lot of great stuff that will leave a legacy for Florida's children. So I am Robin Bartleman, and I am the state representative here in Broward County for West Broward. So literally between 75 and the Everglades. I go south to the county line, so West Miramar, West Pembroke Pines, West Southwest Ranches, West Davie, all of Weston, and a random piece of Sunrise. If you live in Broward County, it's behind the Bagel Mania. But that is my district. People should know that I am an educator by trade. Public education and opportunities for children to get a high quality education are very important to me. I went to Miami-Dade County Public Schools. I grew up in Miami-Dade County, and I was the first one in my family to actually go to college because I got a scholarship from a group of retired teachers. And I went on to become a special education teacher. At that time, I taught students with severe emotional disabilities. I worked with children from pre-K through middle. Then I went on to become an assistant principal in Liberty City in the Middle Scott housing projects when they were still there. I had a Head Start program housed within my school and an ESE center. And then from there, I was a school board member for 16 years, a board member for the Children's Services Council for 12 years, including serving as chair for 4 years, chair of Special Needs Advisory Coalition for Broward County for 12 years, and part of the Readiness Board here in Broward County for 4 years. So I've had a lot of different experiences to prepare me to go to the House, and I tap in on them all to hopefully make a difference.
Beautiful. So we asked you to come and talk about a bill entitled School Readiness Program, House Bill 877, and that short title doesn't quite encompass all of what you were trying to achieve. But tell us why was that important and what did it do?
So now, 3 years ago, I had a parent call me from a different part of the state. Her name was Trinae, and she was really panicked. She had a son with autism, and she could not find placement for him. He was expelled from 6 different preschools. 6. This is a child who, it's really important for them to have a strong educational foundation. And his whole educational journey was being disjointed because schools were not equipped to help him. So I met with my Broward ELC, which I love them. So shout out if they're on the call. And I said, what can we do to help parents like Trinae? We know that parents of students with disabilities have high unemployment rates, high divorce rates because of the stress it puts on the family. It's very difficult for them to hold down a job. We know that the most important years in the child's life are these early learning years, especially for a child with developmental disabilities and special needs, to set that foundation. And we have a statewide problem. We found out that the expulsion rate for children in pre-K programs is 3 times that of K through 12 combined. So just think about that a minute. 3 times of the whole K through 12 system combined. And we are all here because we are dedicated to setting that strong foundation. And yet there was a systemic failure because the kids who needed the help the most had no stability in their education. So we did a couple of things. This bill, and it took 2 years to pass the bill, but we got it through. And I think it actually becomes a better bill when it goes through slowly like that. And it really, we had many different versions, and the final bill I'm incredibly happy with. First, it expands eligibility. For 3-year-olds to 5-year-olds, you only had an IEP for that priority placement. So now you can use an individualized family therapy plan. If you're a provider out there, you know how long the lines are to get an IEP, to get tested, to get that identification. So if you already have one in birth two, it can be used. You can also have documentation and a diagnosis from an educational psychologist, a doctor. So we have a list of people who are allowed to make that diagnosis, because it's unfortunate that the lines are so long to get children identified, and then you're delaying the services they need. We also expanded it to birth to two, where we had the 3-year-olds in line first. Now we have birth and two also included in that. And the most important part of it, which is the part that I love, and is that now we're going to give the teachers the training they need. So I'm a special ed teacher by trade, and if any of you are a special ed teacher, you know that you are trained to deal uniquely with students they come in at different points of development, they have different needs, they have strengths and weaknesses and unique abilities. And so you can really deal with any student once you have a degree or certification in special education. And we found that the schools always got differential funding if they took a student with an IEP. They got infant rate plus 20%. So you're incentivized financially to take the student, but there were no strings attached to that money. The teachers didn't have to be trained. And that kind of explains what happens. If you're not trained to deal with a student with a unique ability, you're going to have a very difficult time containing them in the class. You're going to have serious behavior problems. It's going to impact the learning of all the other students in the center. So now it requires those teachers to have 10 hours of training. And we didn't want to burden the private providers or the teachers. So we actually built it in to the existing structure so that they're going to now get their 10 hours in unique abilities and special education and inclusion practices. And it's really a great thing because, yeah, it's great for the kid who does have a unique ability, but it's great for every child in that classroom, because now they're not spending 80% of their time on one child. And every strategy you use, you can use with every single student in that classroom to ensure they're getting the best educational experience and have high quality educational outcomes. It's just, I'm very excited about this bill. I was very nervous. It took 2 years. I want to thank the senator for holding my hand as well all the way through. But this is going to be a game changer for those parents. I mean, she would get a job because there was stable placement, and then have to leave a job because now there wasn't. And it'll just ensure that every child gets the best education. So I was really excited to pass that bill this session.
Beautiful. I mean, you're bringing up something so important that we all know, that sometimes it takes a while to get a bill passed. And sometimes advocates outside of the process are frustrated, and it's like, oh, we got to wait another year. But you're both illustrating, and I know, Senator, the bill you talked about also was like not in its first year in attempting to reset school readiness eligibility. And you are, as all of your colleagues are, the advocates inside the process who take this bill and become the champion among your colleagues and have to sell it. And so you also are in that in that process alongside those outside the process. Madam Representative, you speak so passionately about this, and I love what you said about making sure the training is included in what teachers are already doing, and emphasizing that the training they're getting is going to help them serve all their children, and make sure that when you are accepting a student who needs some additional care, that your teachers are trained to do that while supporting every other child. And that's just so powerful. And as you mentioned, Senator Cloud, you'd carried that companion bill. And I wonder, Senator, if there's anything you want to add on that bill.
I just want to say thank you to Representative Bartleman for her tenacity. I think the legislature, in appropriating funding to the side, maybe had the vision for it, but they hadn't put in that final length of effort that Representative Bartleman did on making sure the dollars were engaged directly to the service that would allow families to be able to keep their children in a setting that was appropriate and trained for them. So it's just a big kudos to Robin.
Oh, you
Yes.
too. I couldn't do it without you. Oh, and a shout
Yeah.
out to Michelle Watson too. She
Yes.
held our hand the whole time before I forget. We don't do
There.
this alone. We don't do this in isolation. We have partners and people who help us, and that's how you get good legislation. And so it takes a village, and so it's exciting to be able to do good stuff and really make a
Yes.
difference.
I'd highlight one more thing that you mentioned, the mother who called you, who brought this idea, and just a note to all of the advocates who are listening, like it makes a difference when you bring an idea to your elected leaders, that you hold so much of the expertise that they need to do their job and serve constituents well. So look forward to many more ideas coming up in the process. And we do have a question in the Q&A about when and where providers will find this training. And I'm sure your local early learning coalition is the best place to go ask, but is there anything you'd add to that?
No, it'll be set up for you. It'll be through the existing structure when you're taking your classes anyway. So your ELC will help you with that. And we tried to do so it's step so that it's easier. Like for you, I was an educator, right? So I have to get my certification every 5 years, and it's stressful for teachers when they're teaching, having to get certifications. And then many of them are parents and have to come home. They're the breadwinners, some are working 2 jobs. So we tried to build it within the existing structure. But I think the wave of the future is going to be that every teacher is going to have, whether it's early learning or K through 12, you're going to have to know, universal design, because my daughter is a second grade teacher now. She followed me into education. And there are classrooms that almost every kid has a 504 and IEP, and that's a gen ed classroom. So although we do require the ESE, I just feel like every teacher needs to be equipped with those skills, because like you said as well, the whole classroom benefits when a teacher has those skills, because they don't just apply to that student. You can transfer them to all the other students, and good classroom management, good applied behavior analysis, differential learning in terms of reading and the science of reading. Those are all things that everyone needs to know how to do. So
Yes. Well, we thank you for
thank you.
being the advocates inside the building and really carrying the message on the importance of early childhood. And I hope you see all the love that is pouring into the chat that does include a great many hearts.
Oh,
Thank you so much for being part of this program. We'll let you get back to your day, and we'll move on to our next segment. But thank you so much for joining us today and for the work you do all year, every year.
thank you. Thank you for your advocacy and all you do. Like everyone on here, thank you for making a difference.
Yes. Well, now let us move to our second segment, and we'll invite two of our advocacy champions. Molly Grant is Executive Director of the Association of Early Learning Coalitions, someone with experience inside the Senate and inside the Division of Early Learning and Department of Education, back when it was OEL. And Derek McGee, who is that rare breed, a pastor and a lobbyist. And I must thank him for his service on our board at the Children's Movement. Thank you both for being with us.
Happy to be here. Thanks, Madeline.
Yes,
Thank you
Molly,
as
I'm going to
well.
start with you and just ask, we just talked about a couple of bills and heard from the champions directly. Anything you want to add on those two in particular?
I would say, obviously, I know they're not with us anymore, but just a huge shout out to our legislative partners. We have amazing advocates at the legislative level, and you got to see two of them today on screen. And it's without, champions like that in the legislature, none of this would be possible. But with regard to the eligibility, I think, this was a few years coming that we had been working on trying to right size our income threshold for the school readiness program. We saw as soon as the minimum wage amendment was passed and Florida began to start outpacing the nation in terms of wages, we began to see fewer and fewer families qualify for this program, which, obviously helped keep them in the workforce, but then afforded their children those really crucial early learning opportunities to set them up for their foundation of future learning. And so, seeing families come in making just above that threshold, which was so low as it related to federal poverty level, was heartbreaking for coalitions throughout the state, knowing that they couldn't support these families and getting the hand up that they needed to be on that path to economic self-sufficiency. So this change will really, make a huge difference in not just sustaining services for those families and maintaining that eligibility, but also to Senator Colaudi's point, is expanding it just slightly to where we're preserving our system intact for when that final minimum wage amendment comes in next year. So very excited. But then, to the point of now that our system is aligned to state median income, as those changes happen within Florida's economy, within the state of Florida and in individual counties, our system is now very dynamic with Florida's reality. And that's just a really exciting thing. And it will allow our system now to move with the state of Florida and the changes that are happening here, and not, what's happening throughout the nation. So.
Yes. And we had another question that came up from Palm Beach. Will this change allow a two-parent family with 2 children making minimum wage to be eligible for school readiness?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so the way the program is structured, obviously, state median income and where that lies is based on the family size. So how many children, how many parents you have in that family. And so a 2-parent household making minimum wage today at $14 an hour, both working full time up to 38 hours a week with 2 children would qualify for this program.
Okay, great.
So it's very exciting.
Now, what about other bills that were filed, whether they passed or not, in early learning? What would you say?
I would say one of the main other bills that was passed related to early learning, and not necessarily school readiness per se, but it was Senate Bill 738, and it was related to childcare early learning providers. And it had a number of provisions within that bill that, one, looked to streamline regulations, right, reducing administrative burden wherever we can. Another exciting thing in that was oftentimes with regard to the onboarding training that teachers have to do to be able to get into the classroom for an early learning provider, that is time consuming and can be very costly. And so one of the changes in that bill was that those online courses for the DCF 45 hours are now offered at no cost to teachers who are looking to come into our field. And so that's it makes a huge difference, right, in reducing the barriers to getting teachers in the classroom, especially in a field where we have such great turnover in our workforce. And then lastly, I think in that bill, it did also remove some reporting requirements for providers that were getting a little burdensome, right, in terms of the amount of paperwork that they had to maintain and keep on site and get from parents. So a lot of really great changes that was filed in the House side by Representative Fiona McFarland. And I know she carried that bill for 2 years before getting it passed. So it was really exciting to see that finally cross the finish line.
Yes, absolutely. I remember part of that was also the provision to protect family childcare homes and make it so no insurer could knock on their door and say, "Oh, we see you're taking care of children. We're taking away your home insurance." And I know that was in the bill on the House side and not on the Senate side, which ultimately passed. So as we think about unfinished business for next year, that's one thing that we'd highlight. What else would you add about priorities that may emerge again next year?
Well, I think to that point, right, there's always opportunity to find new ways that we can continue to reduce administrative burden, streamline regulations, streamline programs with one another. There are a number of programs that our early learning providers participate in from the state level, from VPK to the school readiness program, and always finding opportunities where we can bridge the gap between those two programs and make it easier for providers who participate in both to navigate that system. I would say too, I know there's still a long way to go with eligibility and where we can land with making sure we're increasing opportunities for parents to participate in the workforce and supporting children on, setting them up for success in education and later life. But one of the main areas I think we're constantly focused on is the amount of investment that is going into these early learning opportunities to both support children and support our workforce. And so continuing to look at where there's opportunity to increase those investments, increase the reimbursement rate that we provide to our providers, and making sure that it is sufficient to provide the level of services we're asking them to provide in both programs, as well as looking for how do we stabilize funding in communities from year to year to ensure that we have the resources at the local level to support sustaining the children who are already participating in our programs.
Yes, that relates to another question that just popped up in the chat about, is there a limit to families enrolling who qualify under the new criteria that we talked about with the senator? Do you want to answer that one in terms of that stability of funding?
I think there is a limit, right? It all depends on how much funding is invested into the program and how far that funding will go in terms of the number of children it will support and the number of families it will support. Obviously, we never really know who's going to come in our door or what funding will be available from day to day, because it's kind of an in and out type of program. But right now, I think we support across the board throughout the state around 212,000 children in the school readiness program throughout the year, which, sounds like a lot, but when you look at the potentially eligible population throughout our state, it's roughly 22% of the families that could be eligible. So obviously, the more money we put into the program, the further it can go, the more benefits and outcomes we'll see for families, for children. So
Yes.
I hope that answered the question that was asked in the chat.
I think so. And I want to ask now about the budget, and I'll go to you first, Molly, and Derek, I'll ask you to fill in if there's anything else you saw in the budget. But what would you say about early learning budget highlights this year?
I would say, when it was first passed, there was a lot of concern because at face value, it looked like there was a huge net cut to the school readiness program, particularly as it relates to the non-recurring funding that had been appropriated in the previous fiscal year. They did increase, however, the base funding, right? That recurring money that we see every year, year to year, they increased that funding by 42 million. But overarchingly, it looked like there was going to be about a $78 million cut to the program, which, would have equated to vast numbers of children being disenrolled from the program and families being impacted in terms of being able to continue in the workforce. Thankfully, there was a provision in the back of the bill of the Appropriations Act called Revert and Reappropriate, which essentially allowed any remaining funds from the previous fiscal year to be retained in the system to help fill in some of those gaps. And so thankfully, because of that language and working with the Department of Education, who was amazing partners in facilitating that process of revert and reappropriate out into the early learning coalition communities, a vast majority of that cut was kind of mitigated. So
Awesome. Derek, what would you add there?
I think Molly touched on all of it. I love how she mentioned that there was a concern initially when the budget was done. And this session by itself, right, the way everything drug out for so long, there were a lot of concerns, a lot of rumors to brace for impact. End up being a whole lot better than what we all expected. And so, but she covered the details. And let me just give kudos to all those who are involved. Molly does an amazing job. Melon, you mentioned about Michelle and about Aaron and others, but just thank you all. I mean, the great work that's getting done. This definitely is a team sport. And when sessions like these take place, which is an anomaly by itself, but the end result ended up being a whole lot different and better than we were preparing for. So
Right.
kudos.
Well, and we didn't really get to talk with the legislators about how that school readiness eligibility bill got passed, but it wasn't in its original form. It got added to another education bill when it was clear that one wasn't going to get through all of its votes on the floor. And I think what you're talking about now too, early learning being negotiated as a really top priority toward the absolute end of session, it means that when we brace for impact, we show up and make sure that those conversations come to a close. And those advocates inside the building are so crucial for making sure that happens. Derek, you alluded to how strange this session was, and I think generally we think about the 60 days that the legislators are in Tallahassee to do their work. We think of that as session, but it's October 1 and session kind of begins next week. Tell us about how the
Yeah.
calendar works and what to expect.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So Florida is unlike other states, right? Where we do 60 consecutive days of session. We also do 6 to 7 committee weeks that lead up to it. And I had to always inform people that those committee weeks should be added to the 60 days. So it ends up being much longer than that. But we'll have 6 committee weeks. The first one begins next week. So the week of the 6th through the 10th, members will be in town. Both of their meetings are on Tuesday and Wednesday, a few Thursday morning. But these are meetings where the committees are coming in, legislators are meeting to talk about varied things from agency priorities to presentations from invited guests to come in. Any bills that are filed can be heard during the committee week if that chairman so chooses. And all the work that's done during committee weeks are a part of the convening of session come January 13th. So we have a committee week next week, and then it'll be succeeded by the week of the 13th through the 17th will be the second committee week. And then there are 2 committee weeks in November, and those dates are November 3rd through the 7th, and then November 17th through the 21st. And then we have committee weeks 5 and 6, 2 consecutive weeks, which is December 1st through the 5th, and then the 8th through the 12th. And as those committee weeks convene, you will see members staying in town much longer. More things will be discussed in that regard. Session begins January 13th and it concludes March 13th. And so they'll maximize those 6 committee weeks so that when they get here for the full session, they've already built momentum and really trying to address as much as possible while they can. And so there'll be a lot of things done in that regard.
Yeah. And in terms of the process, I know when we do our advocacy trainings, we always tell people summer is the time to talk about a new
Yes,
idea, to
yes,
plant the
yes.
seed. Committee weeks is where you start to see what's being broadcast. What are the kinds of things, to your point, that they're inviting experts to talk about that signal what they might work on? Like, how do you think about the calendar for advocates and when to do what? And what do you do
Yes.
in session?
It's a great point. So I always try to advise, look at this process 3 ways. You have the pre-session, the actual session, and the post-session. Right. And that pre-session to me is once the governor has acted on the budget, and really let's just say July 1, the beginning of the fiscal year, from that time until session begins, all of that to me is part of pre-session. And I could even factor in committee weeks. But during that time, you're factoring in local advocacy that builds into state advocacy. So locally, you're meeting with your local legislators, right? You're meeting with their staff. And I try to always advise parties, never be offended if a legislator cannot meet, but they encourage you to meet with their aide. Meet with the aide. Many times we've seen that aide become the actual legislator in the out years, but also that aide can become your greatest advocate, but it could become that roadblock that prevents you from getting anything done. But you want to try to meet with them while they're in the district and have conversations with them. If the first time you meet with your local elected officials when you get to Tallahassee, you miss some great opportunities to have impact. And so we are right now, in my opinion, in the pre-session. Again, I factor committee weeks in that regard. We're going to be meeting with those persons and make sure they understand what your priorities are, what's important, the why behind what you're asking for. But a key phrase that everyone must always take into consideration that's going to be asked of you is, what's the return on investment? Right? So when you're asking for dollars and cents, when you're asking for policy changes, what's the ROI on that? There are many legislators who are novices to early education space. And so as a result, they've never even entertained the Chapter 1000 series of the Florida statute. They don't know what that looks like. And so when you're having conversation with them, a part of it is you educating them. Other part is you're trying to create more advocates. So you have the pre-session where you're using your local delegation meetings, you're scheduling one-on-one meetings with them, right? You're trying to make sure they clearly understand you're presenting them with information that will be helpful to them. I always invite them to events you have going on locally, right? Whether it's invite them to do a tour, if you're having a gala or something like that, invite them. They may not be able to come, but always extend an invitation. And then once session officially begins, that's the session work. That's when everything picks up. And you'll find a difference with legislators, right? When session picks up, their meeting time goes from maybe 30 minutes in the district to 5 to 10 to 15 minutes in their office. Their attention span is much shorter. And so you want to make sure that you are using the session process to build on the blocks you started in the pre-session. And so during that time, you're now reminding them what you already talked about. You're showing them whether it be legislation, making them aware of appropriations asked in that regard, and really letting them be able to see what is going on. They want to know that you are a good fiscal steward of state dollars. So educate them on how the monies are being used, being very transparent in regards to that. All those things really, really do matter. And so I would tell all those who are listening, never allow yourself to believe or be told that you can't make a difference in this process. I still subscribe to the mindset that all politics is local. So it begins in your neighborhood, it begins in your local area, and then it comes to Tallahassee. But at some point, those elected officials have to come back to the district and give accountability and give account to what they've done. And so you want to make sure that you have armed them. My phrase for lobbying is help your friends help you. So make sure that all your friends are aware of what is going on, identify, and the goal is to have them look at you as a subject matter expert. So if something comes up in early education and they get stumped, you want them to think about calling you or texting you and getting your expertise on what's going on. Representative Barterman kind of mentioned about the village, right? And how so many people played a actual role in there. Her great idea that was brought to her came from a local conversation, but the end result required a lot of hands to be involved in that. And so the pre-session is important, the post-session is important. I mean, the session, and then post-sessions, once they adjourn session, it's the fortification process, right? Convincing the governor and his team not to recommend vetoes of bills that pass, protecting appropriations that's gotten into the budget. The governor doesn't veto those items. Working with the department. Carrie Miller is amazing to work with. She's an amazing person. So having those conversations pre, during, and post session repeatedly so that the department is aware of the motivation, but you're working with them in that regard. And then you're ready to go once those monies are available July 1. So the entire process, it's long, it's way longer than 60 days. And so never assume that January 13th or March 13th is the only time. It's not. Right now, as we're talking and we're giving this counsel and this advice, right now is the time we should be working. And so it's never ending, and it's always a cyclical process.
Absolutely. And you talk about, meeting with your legislators in that pre-session period. There's also if you want to show up to a delegation meeting,
Yes.
you get to hear what everyone in your county who's in the state house or senate might have to say, and you get to raise your voice there and raise an issue. And I think we have a resource for folks to see which ones are coming up. A bunch of them have already happened. Some counties have multiple. There are different rules on whether you need to sign up to speak or not, but that's another opportunity. And then the other date that I would add is Children's Week this year in February, the 22nd to the 27th. And last year we were at the Capitol doing the first annual KidCast, and both Senator Coletta and Representative Bartleman were on that. And so I think we'll have that link in the chat if you missed it. And we'll do it again for our second annual this year.
Absolutely.
I want to move now to a few more questions that are in the chat, and hopefully you have some insight on some of these. But another question on family childcare. Molly, you mentioned in one of the bills where, this requirement to have brochures that parents sign that, yes, I received a brochure that it's flu season and things like that. It appears that change might not have applied to family childcare. Do you have any comments on whether the requirement may be eliminated there?
I think that was similar to the insurance issue, right? Where it was in one version of the bill and not in the other, and just failed to be picked up whenever they were merging them together. I think it was oversight, right? So I think there's opportunity, particularly as we continue to look at where there areas where we can continue to streamline and reduce those overburdensome regulations, for that to pop up again next year. I know it's already been brought to my attention by a few others, so I think it's already being considered in terms of a tweak that needs to be made to make sure that that is taken into consideration.
Beautiful. Then there's another question. Is there a consideration to collapse the Gold Seal program into a differential reimbursement for school readiness programs?
So I don't know exactly what the question is asking, but I do know that the Gold Seal program, right, does have a separate allocation within the General Appropriations Act of $70 million. And that $70 million is used to provide differential allocations to our Gold Seal providers for every school readiness child they have enrolled. So that differential is then applied on top of their base reimbursement rate as to support that quality, right, for the Gold Seal
Yeah.
differential. So,
And that amount didn't change in last year's budget.
it did not, but the Department of Education, the Division of Early Learning, did request that pot of funding to be increased for this next fiscal year. So hopefully we'll see that legislative budget recommendation get picked up and legislators, take an interest in it.
All right. One more, and this one's about property tax. The senator and others supported expanding the property tax abatement to all Gold Seal providers, not just those who own their property. So I'm interpreting this as like, even if you lease your property, you're getting that. Do you have any comments on that change? And Derek, it wasn't a bad one on property tax.
It was not. That's why I started laughing. I thought it was another conversation. So thank you. I appreciate that. Go ahead, Molly. I'm sorry.
I do not have any insight on that, actually. I am unfortunately not the Gold Seal expert on this panel for sure. However, I'm happy to find additional information about that and follow up with whoever is interested in understanding the abatement of the property tax consideration for Gold Seal providers.
Great. And then for either of you on the budget, is there an understanding on how the federal government budget cuts may impact Florida's pass-through dollars for school readiness?
So I am not a federal advocate at this time in my life. However, I do connect quite often with some people at the federal space. And as far as I know, there have not been any conversations about cuts to the CCDBG program, which is the program that funds the school readiness program for Florida. So I have not seen any consideration of cuts to that program. I know there's a lot of talk at the federal level regarding, Health Head Start and some other programs within the Department of Education. But as of this point, I haven't heard anything about cuts to the CCDBG program.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah, that matches everything I've heard, that they really recognize that two-generation impact that we were talking about with Senator Claudiude, and that hasn't been touched. So we'll see. I know there's a lot of chatter that even level funding is a cut when you think about rising costs, and so we'll be tuned in to share that, as we are not federal advocates either, but
I have seen several bills be proposed at the federal level that have looked to, and they've been bipartisan efforts to see where we can expand opportunities for the CCDBG program. So we are tracking those closely, but yeah.
yes. Well, we've gotten through all the questions from our wonderful audience. Last thing I might ask you is if you have any predictions or wish list items, if you got to have that magic ball, and anything you'd say as we look ahead to session.
I'm not going to predict anything because in my experience, nothing's over till it's over, and there's just nothing predictable usually about the legislative session or the process. But I will say, if I had a magic wand for the day, I would invest an additional $5 billion into early childhood education and make sure it's accessible to every child in Florida so that parents can go to work and kids are set up for success. Realistically, will that happen? Probably not. But if I were queen for a day, that's what I would.
Not yet. Hashtag all in for early learning.
In terms of a
And
more
listen,
realistic ask, though, I would say, just looking to wherever we can and wherever
Yeah.
there's funding, invest it where it matters the most, right?
Yes.
Because it's such a difference along the entire continuum of education, but also the entire continuum of that child's life into adulthood. So invest it where it matters. And then with what funding we do have, just make sure that we are stabilizing that and putting it where it needs to go to make sure we're not creating havoc in individual communities and seeing children kicked out of a program that is so beneficial for them and their families. So, Derek.
Well,
And
yeah,
for
and I would
me,
just
number
say
one,
you
go ahead,
hit a
please,
nerve.
please.
You hit a nerve, Molly. There's a lot
Yeah,
of
I was about to say I'm on
lobby for
Team Molly.
Queen in the
Yes.
chat. Yeah. So
Yeah.
just Derek, sorry to interrupt.
No, I would say number one, I'm on Team Molly. I love that she's queen for the day because I agree with that. And secondly, my other wish list would be that we can grow the list or bench of legislators who are advocates for early childhood. Right, we have our strong ones, but seeing more has always been a desire of mine. And I will tell you, we have more now than we had in years past. There were years past where we would have maybe one or two. in between both chambers. And so we have definitely seen growth, but seeing more take interest in this, I think is critically important. And my prediction for session, diplomatically, it is unpredictable. Directly, I think it's going to be, I think we should brace for impact. We have to remember this is the last session for the governor, for the speaker, and for the Senate president. And so usually you're thinking about legacy. Property tax is going to be a big item this session. It's not hidden in everybody's talking point. So I think that's going to be important. My hope is that they're done enough for me to enjoy spring break with my family this year. I only get it every other year. But I think it's going to be a challenging one this upcoming session. Also, with the economists predicting that monies, we're getting near pre-session or pre-recession or in recession in the out year, a year from now or so. And so in that regard, I think they're going to be tighter on how they appropriate dollars. But all those things are factored in. And then on the back end of session is election. So usually in election year, you start seeing things a little bit differently. But I would just implore everyone, even with all that being said, never stop advocating. Never stop advocating. Never take a year off, because that 1 year off can be difference between seeing success and finding yourself a step or two behind everyone else. So still advocate regardless of what it looks like.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you both so much for
Absolutely.
being with us. Thank all of you for tuning in. I will just share a couple of words in closing here. I want to thank our partners at FACT. You both mentioned Michelle Watson, but we work closely with them to bring you those legislative briefing emails and track the bills that matter. And she has been a presence on these webinars for years and was out of town this year, but just want to acknowledge our partners there and all the local children's services councils and association and early learning coalitions, who are such great advocacy partners. So you can stay up to date with those emails in the 26th session and sign up. I think there's a link in the chat. And I also want to invite everyone to our future call, because for all that we are focused on the legislature and the policies and the funding that are coming down, so often before you get a policy passed, it is a practice in a local community. It is something that one center or one community is trying. And my colleague Rocio Velasquez, who hosts those calls every other Tuesday, is on the hunt for what are those examples of what's working well, of where folks have already figured out how to do this and they're doing it. And so next week on the future call, we'll have Jen Knopf from the Reed Foundation, who's talking about how they went in and partnered inside early learning centers in the Paramore area in Orlando. And how did they work with teachers who maybe didn't know they were doing early literacy, but now they know. And so you can hear more about that, and you can check out our whole archive for those calls and make any suggestions about practices and happenings that we're not aware of. And I think with that, we'll close and give you just a few minutes back in your day. Thank you all so much for being with us, and look forward to a great 2026 session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.